The way the royalists describe those who came after powerful figures, they say, well, this person who eventually succeeded Nebuchadnezzar, that was his son, that was his descendant. Definitely a descendant, literally more of a grandson than a son, but he still maintains the throne of Nebuchadnezzar in the Babylonian Empire. What the story, or what the beginning of chapter 5 does not tell us, is that Babylon's in big trouble because certain aspects of God's prophecy that were outlined in chapter 2, remember the dream in chapter 2 where there's this huge statue, the top of it is gold, that's Nebuchadnezzar, that's the Babylonian Empire, and then there's a section right below the head and shoulders, not the shampoo commercial, please, but the section below that is bronze, that represents another empire. That empire, or the forces behind that empire, have been waging war with Babylon. Babylon's been on the losing side. In fact, for all we know, when chapter 5 opens, the opposing forces have literally surrounded the city of Babylon. The city of Babylon that has these huge walls, has all the city of gold practically. It's got these walls that are, it's got 17 miles of walls that are, in some places, are 22 feet thick, 90 feet high. Sheriff showed us some pictures last Sunday about the city gates. City gates were made of bronze, and not just for decorative purposes. If you had the regular old Sears Roebuck kind city gates, made out of wood, those babies could be torched in a few minutes. Bronze, not so much. So you've got this very, very intricate defense mechanism and system built around Babylon. This series of extremely high, extremely huge, extremely thick walls interconnected with this series of moats. It's practically invasion proof, right? Yeah, right. Anyway, Babylon's in big trouble. And the question is, does the king know it? He's got to know it if he has any sense. So the question is, does he care? Well, apparently not that much. Or he's trying to get his troubles off his mind because this particular evening he decides to hold this big banquet. Why? We don't know. Maybe he found in his wallet, he found some Chick-fil-A coupons that he'd forgotten about, and they're about to expire. So yeah, let's invite the gang over. No, something much more elaborate than that. Because as chapter 5 opens, it tells us King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. Hey, when you're about to be invaded, what else would you do? Yeah, throw a big party. Hey, let's have fun. Not only that, verse 2, while Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. The only thing stranger than holding a banquet in these perilous times is, hey, remember those? I remember Granddaddy telling me about all these things he brought up from Jerusalem. Let's bring them over. Why? I don't know. I guess, number one, well, they look nice. They look pretty. And, gee, they look so drinkable. They look so usable. Why don't we get fancy here? Maybe also there's some whistling past the graveyard kind of thinking on Belshazzar's part. Hey, our gods beat their God. Our gods can beat anyone. I don't care who is standing outside or who's coming for us. So yeah, bring these goblets, all these other fancy things from the old Jerusalem temple. we can kind of celebrate the fact about how victorious our gods are. Verse 3, so they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. Not only that, as they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. In other words, their own gods. Yeah, let's do a victory pep rally for our gods. How wonderful they are. They did it before. Maybe they'll do it again. Yeah, we'll emerge victorious. Gee, we always talk about be careful what you're doing. You might be tempting God. Well, God isn't tempted. God's never tempted to do anything. But on this occasion, on this very occasion, God decides to act. Because verse 5, suddenly, or in the same hour, as they were celebrating, as they were drinking, as they were refilling their goblets, fingers of a human hand appeared. And this is, keep in mind, this is way centuries before the advent of laser technology and astral projection and all those things. For this, apparently, this disembodied hand, and in fact, it may not even be an entire hand, just enough to show a finger. Maybe it's holding a pen. Maybe not. Maybe it's writing with its finger. But the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall. We don't know how big the hand is. Was it a normal human hand? Was it a giant hand? Whatever size it was, it got everybody's attention. Because here they are, this wonderful courtyard or banquet hall or whatever. And everybody's just having fun. And then suddenly this very strange apparition shows up and starts writing these strange words near the lampstand in the royal palace. Near the lampstand so that, hey, plenty of light. You can't miss him. He's not writing over in a dark corner. Yeah. Hey, king, nudge, nudge, look over there. Something weird's going on. Check it out. The king watched the hand as it wrote. And whatever level of drunkenness he was in, he sobered up pretty quickly, apparently. His face turned pale. He was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. Your translation may read, the joints of his hips were loosened. Maybe, it gives you all sorts of ideas about what he was going through right there. But he's terrified. He doesn't understand what the writing says, as we're about to find out, but this whole thing is just weird enough and probably on top of everything else that he's aware of that's going on. This is really strange. Talk about a buzzkill for the party. Apparently, it just goes down real quickly. Or maybe the rest of the revelers go on, but the king goes off to business. Verse 7, the king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners, his brain trust. King still has a brain trust, just like Nebuchadnezzar did. And he said to these wise men of Babylon, wise men advisedly, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck. And he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Third? Number 3? I can't even be number 2? What's this number 3 business? Well, one little detail about Belshazzar that I forgot to point out. He's not the absolute king. Because when his let's see, it's either his uncle or his daddy who put him on the throne. Well, his uncle or his daddy was also a king. He didn't abdicate or anything like that. So the two of them are what you might call co-regents. And his daddy is number 1. That would make Belshazzar number 2. Daddy's off in Arabia somewhere, according to the commentators. He's either taking care of business elsewhere, maybe he's fighting forces out there, maybe he knows what's headed for Babylon, and he just decided to get the heck out of Dodge, if you know what I mean. Yeah, Belshazzar, just, here are the keys to the car. Have fun. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. We'll talk to you later. That kind of thing. So, Belshazzar is number 2. He's not giving up his place, but hey, you can be the next guy in power under me. Such a deal. If you can tell me what this is all about, what is the writing on the wall? By the way, in case you're wondering, I don't have to tell you this, but obviously that phrase, the writing on the wall, this is where that phrase comes from. In case anyone should ask you, tell me what the writing on the wall means. Verse 8. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. 2 possible explanations for this, maybe 3. First of all, God veiled their understanding. Secondly, the writing obviously is not in their native language. This may actually be Hebrew. And by this time, everybody assumes Hebrew is a dead language. Why bother to learn the Hebrew language? That's a possibility. Third thing is, maybe they do know the language. Maybe they do know the words. They do know what it means, or they have a pretty good guess, and they're scared to tell the king because he might not respond very well. 3 possibilities here. But for whatever reason, we just don't know. His nobles and their failure or their inability or their refusal to tell the king the meaning of the words results in verse 9. King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew even more pale. His nobles were baffled. What's going on? So with all this confusion going on, the queen, verse 10, and this is more likely the queen mother, because she has some information that spans a couple of generations here. More likely this may be Belshazzar's mom, or maybe some other relative. Hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. May the king live forever, she said. Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. Hey, buck up. There's a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, that is Nebuchadnezzar, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief for the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he'll tell you what the writing means. When all else fails, send for the right guy. Oh yeah, honey, don't you remember? You probably don't even know him, but there's this guy out there in the bureaucracy. He used to be a big guy back in the day, but he's off somewhere. But he's somewhere in the directory. Just call him up. Have him come over. He can solve this for you. Now, we're not sure exactly what status Daniel is here. He's obviously not in the inner circle, but as you might guess, every king has his own brain trust, his own little inner circle, and it's only with great rarity that someone who is in a predecessor's inner circle makes it to the successor's inner circle. That's true of just about any kind of organization. You get a new guy or a new person in charge, hey, I want my own folks around me. It's just human nature. So Daniel didn't get fired. He didn't get killed or anything like that, but he got reassigned. So he's somewhere in the office. But the queen mom says, you know what? I just happen to remember there's this guy who can can resolve all sorts of riddles like this. You really ought to talk to him if it's bothering you this much. So call for him, and he'll tell you what the writing means. That's what the king does. Verse 13. Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means." Look at that handwriting on the wall. Craziest thing happened tonight. And these got these 4 words in. I'm just curious. What could it mean? Because my guys can't explain it. Now I've heard that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple. And of course, we know being clothed in purple represents purple's really fancy wear. So that means we're gonna deck you out in dressed to the nines and all these fabulous fashions. Not only that, we're going to put a gold chain around your neck, and you will be made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom. Look at Daniel's response. Verse 17. Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself. Give your rewards to someone else." Hey, you got this sense of, been there, done that. I don't need that. Daniel may also be aware that, hey, this Babylonian empire is running on empty, and then, so you're going to give me all these awards, big deal. They won't last the night. Also, think about the attitude. It's, Daniel's respectful, but read between the lines. You can kind of sense there's a difference in the attitude that he had toward King Nebuchadnezzar. Go back and read Daniel's response in last week's chapter 4. "Oh, gee, oh, your majesty, if only what I'm about to tell you applied to your enemies and not to yourself. I really don't want to tell you this." There was this kind of bond between him and Nebuchadnezzar that had been established over time. He had respect for Nebuchadnezzar. This guy, maybe not so much. Keep your rewards. This is, if you really want to know, this is kind of a waste of my time. Woke me up out of a good night's sleep. But, I'm here. You asked, so if you want, I'll read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. And so he does. Verse 18. "Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory, splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death." Remember what Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar back in chapter 2? Your power is absolute. There is no Supreme Court. There's no appellate process for anyone who wants to contest whatever you want to do. If you want to do it, you can do it. You've got the absolute power. No one can stop you. So those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. Remember the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 4 in last week's reading? Daniel's just outlining what happened as a result of that dream and a result of Nebuchadnezzar's behavior. God deposed him from his royal throne. He stripped him of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. This is what I told your father Nebuchadnezzar, that he was who he was by the grace of God. Hint, hint, something that you have not picked up on. Look at the continuation of Daniel's message, verse 22. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Obviously, hey, even if he never knew his granddad, even if he wasn't even alive when all that happened to Nebuchadnezzar, family tales get around, at Thanksgiving table over dessert. They talk about, let's talk about the time old King Nebuchadnezzar just turned into a real beast, and they had to build a corral out for him because they couldn't, he he would tear up the palace every time they brought him in. Oh man, let me tell you about that. So he had to be aware of what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar was not shy about saying, this is why this happened to me, because I was full of pride, I was arrogant, I defied the living God, and God humbled me. He had to hear or be at least familiar with some of that. And hey, there's a lesson there. You don't get carried away with yourself. Look what happened to your granddad and how awful it was for him during that time. Don't let that happen to you. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, as our song says. You knew all this, Belshazzar, but you didn't learn the lesson. Verse 23, instead you've set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank wine from them. It's not what these goblets were made for. They were made for holy things, and you've desecrated them. You have committed sacrilege. You have blasphemed the living God. You did that to the living God, and then you praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. You didn't even think twice about the God who allows you to breathe the air and to survive for one more breath of air. Breath by breath. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written. Many, many tekel parson, or in some translations, upparson, upfarson. There we go. 4 words. Here are what these words mean. Many. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. He's numbered you and finished your reign. Many is used twice. Many is half of those words. That could be construed to say, hey, God measured you twice. He numbered you twice just to make sure that he wasn't wrong the first time. Maybe he could figure a break for you in there. Wasn't in there. The other thing that we're aware of, and because this happened back to Pharaoh in Genesis, he had this dream. Pretty much the same dream, but 2 different scenarios. And Joseph, who was brought in to explain the dream to him, said, look, God's sending you a message. And the fact that you saw essentially the same dream twice means that the matter has been firmly decided by God. If he's told you this twice, he's decided to do it, and he's going to do it soon. So, many, many. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. You're finished. You're done. Tekel, verse 27. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. The scales, well, this is how they measured things, especially in payment. By these scales, I'm sure you've seen them. You know, if you ever watched an old Perry Mason episode, you got Lady Justice holding the scales, two pans hanging from this balance. And this is what merchants used to do. They'd have this little bag of weights, and let's say, okay, yeah, I'll be happy to sell you that dress or this cattle feed or whatever for a pound of silver, and you say done. So you count out what you think is a pound of silver from your satchel, and the merchant gets out. If he's a really good guy and honest, he has this weight that measures exactly 1 pound. He puts that on on one of the pans. You put your silver on the other pan. And if you have counted out exactly a pound of silver, they even up. If you haven't, if you put too little, you're up here. If you put too much, you're down here and his weight is up here. So you keep adjusting until they are absolutely even or as close to even as possible. God is using that as a metaphor for who you are and how important you are, Mr. King, which is not very. God has measured you on the scales, and you're a lightweight. When you go away, no one is going to worry about you. No one is going to weep bitter tears about you. They're not going to do a 6-hour documentary on CNN about this great king that you were, because you weren't. Your kingdom is about to end, and you were not a really good king or very important king to begin with. But here's what's going to happen. Here's the final word. And you see Perez, which of course is not exactly the same word as parson, but Perez is the singular form of parson. So, not a problem. But that final word, your king, means that your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians, just as God predicted in his dream to Nebuchadnezzar. This ain't good news for the king. And, you can kind of see he probably has this blank expression on his face. What do I do now? Oh, yeah, I promised some things. What do we have for our guest tonight? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, okay, I promised you this. Let me give it to you. So at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. And he was very patient about this because he said, I didn't eat it. And the way things turned out, he was the third highest ruler in the kingdom for probably about 3 more hours. Because, verse 30, that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Just like that. Babylonian Empire is under new management. Those wonderful defenses around the city of Babylon, the city walls with those elaborate and beautiful city gates. Someone mysteriously left them unlocked. Or if they were locked, they just became unlocked at just the right time. And the Medes and the Persians were able to, like the song goes, walk right in, sit right down. Maybe they were actually singing that song as they went in. And, apparently Belshazzar's first clue that anything was wrong or he was in trouble when this invading force entered the quarters and arrested him. And probably didn't even bother with any kind of legalities. They just killed him. There's no point in exiling a king that you're deposing. He's just going to come back and make trouble for you. And besides, hey, we're here to conquer the Babylonians. There's no plan B here. So Belshazzar is slain that night. bad end to what he thought was going to be a really nice night of celebrating. The Medes and the Persians have taken over a king named Darius. It was actually a sub-king because he's ruling under a guy named King Cyrus, who's Persian. So you got the Medes and the Persians have this little working arrangement here. But God's prophecy in chapter 2 has been carried out. Babylon, and in fact, the Babylonian Empire is now part, you can almost see these full-page ads in the business newspapers. The Babylonian Empire, now part of the whole great new Persian Mede Empire. They probably even had a new logo, to go with it. So, change in power, as God predicted, as God said would happen. That prophecy is being carried out. That brings us to the end of chapter 5. And next week, we're going to have a little episode involving Daniel, and an episode that if you grew up in Vacation Bible School, you probably sang a song about this. So it's this is a story that will be very, very, very familiar, but we'll still try to make it entertaining anyway. So if you will, please read chapter 6. That'll be our substance of our lesson next Sunday. And in the meantime, we'll meet back here, Lord willing, next Sunday. In the meantime, have a wonderful 4th of July, wonderful holiday. Please don't eat too many hot dogs. Stay away from firecrackers. Don't let them. Try to encourage your neighbors not to set them off in any dry fields because, then we have to worry about fires. But anyway, pray for rain. And I give you 733 things please don't do or please worry about. And then I say, please have fun and enjoy yourself. But, if you can work your way through all that and have a good time, I hope you do. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Sunday.